that child will be a curse on that family for the rest of its life. It will, even if it disappears, it will come back to try and get money or get bailed out of a legal position or legal trouble, or try to find a place to live, try to weasel their way into the parents' will, and they will steal money off siblings, and they will just cause an awful lot of psychological and emotional and financial disruption within that family. The only person I know so far that dealt with it successfully was a guy in England who contacted me. And what they did, well, I thought this was a very good idea. What they did was, well, they were very well aware that the child was a psychopath years ago, just because of all the things I just described they were doing. And it was a boy, so I don't know what you do with a girl, but basically they started a fund, and they told him that you could have the money, which was several £1,000s, if he joined the Royal Navy or the military. And he did. He joined the Royal Navy, and they gave him the money, and they never heard from him ever again. So that because he was just torturing and destroying their lives right up until the moment he left. So that's probably how you would deal with it. I would always make the assumption that the child is not a psychopath until it becomes undeniable, and then you have a legal obligation to take care of that child until they're 18, and you should be developing some kind of a plan so they can't damage the rest of the family, and that's what my suggestion would be.
Would you suggest? Say you identify the child early on as a sociopath. And by the way, I just want to tell you that my older brother, you pretty much went through the list that my older brother did when he was a young kid. So I really understand what you were saying when you're talking about a sociopath within the family being really destructive. But short of, for example, setting up a fund and having them go into the army, which actually is a brilliant idea.
Yes.
Do you think there's any use for counseling in that case? In other words, if a family, I mean, like you said, you sort of have to take care of them until they're 18, and then what do you do to get to 18, other than try to do the usual things that parents do to keep boundaries there?
Well, counseling doesn't work with psychopaths. It actually makes them worse. Okay. That's been known for right back to Herbie Cleckley's The Mask of Sanity back in the 1940s, and it was even observed back in the 1910s. Mm-hmm. Indirectly, when they were starting to look at psychiatry and psychology was starting to take off, they worked on some criminals, and they came to the conclusion that the ones who had psychopathic traits or were psychopaths used the therapy to become more devious, because what they do is they learn a new skill about how to manipulate people. So that doesn't work. They will go, so it's a nightmare. It's a curse. The family will have to, if the family knows they're dealing with a psychopath, it's a good thing in some ways, because then they can implement a strategy to protect the other children from them. Mm-hmm. They can be prepared for when he tries to pull scams on them, like falsely accusing the parents of molesting him or abusing or neglecting him. So they can be ready for that when it comes along. They can be ready, if it's a female psychopath, they can try in some way to have her made sexually educated about pregnancy and things like that, so she's not having a baby when she's 12, or 13. Mm-hmm. And so it's really going to be a case of contingency. Based again, and like it's the whole thing again, knowledge is power. Once you know what you're dealing with, well, then you know you can handle it. But also, I have no evidence of this. I have done no research into it. But it's one thing I do want to look at in the future is that, I was just, as I said to somebody earlier on, that the psychopaths know when people are onto them. I wonder if the psychopathic child knew the parents were onto them and knew what they were dealing with. Would it modify its pathology and play it down? So there could be sort of almost like a behavioral therapy kind of thing going on there too as well. So it's worth looking at. Knowledge is power at the end of the day.
That was actually a follow-up question there, which would be if is there anything to do with, especially if the child is identified very early, like, at 7 or 8 or, before 10, before puberty kicks in, whether, that kind of behavior can be, if not, completely turned around, at least made less destructive. And I was going to ask if you had any experience with that, but you'd mentioned that you'd want to do some research on it.
Yeah.
What's your feeling? Do you think there's any possibility of sort of mitigating the psychopathy as the child gets older? In other words, once you have it, you have it, or is it possible to at least make it a little less obvious, or a little less expressed?
No, I don't think so. If it happens, they'll be doing it themselves deliberately. You could, but I'm a great believer in the sort of Pavlovian conditioning thing, where if you hold rewards over them, like money and things like that, and say if you get through 2012 without doing one of the bad things you've done, I'll give you $1,000 cash on next New Year's Eve. So you might be able to do things like that with them, almost bribe them.
Oh, I see. So sort of perform Aikido on the psychopathy, sort of work with it
precisely.
To decrease the effects. That's very clever. That's,
you've almost got to think on their level,
Mm-hmm. What do you think of the more recent work suggesting that there may be a combined genetic environmental underpinnings to, I guess, what the medical or psychiatric literature is calling antisocial personality disorder, say in adolescence, having to do with the monoamine oxidase? Have you? I don't know if you've been following it, and if you have, I'd love to hear your opinion on it.
Well, the evidence they presented is not really compelling, and in fact, it kind of debunks itself right off the bat, because there's one neurologist, a neuroscientist who's doing a tour with CAT scans, and his family actually had psychopaths in the background. One of them was a serial killer, and he shows that he has exactly the same brain pattern as a psychopath, but he's not himself. He himself is not a psychopath. So off the bat, there, a lot of the stuff they're saying about genetics, if you look really deep into it, they don't really have any evidence. It's as simple as that. It's almost like they're trying to make out there's a psychopathic gene, but this is sort of a lot of this is lazy journalism. Like there was recently a scientist in England. There was a BBC did a report about this guy who claimed he could cure psychopaths.
Oh, okay.
And when you read the story, he says nothing of the sort. What he says, this is what you see. This is all part of the control system as well. If you look at most of these scientific reports, the most common words you see are maybe, could be, is a possibility. And that's not the same thing as it's a fact. But somehow we live in an age where everything a scientist said is automatically assumed by the media as being an absolute fact. And it's presented that way. The genetic thing and the psychopathic thing, it may be true, but it may not be true. I don't believe it is true because I've still not seen hard evidence. There's also the issue of epigenetics, where we basically switch on the gene sequences that not all gene sequences in the brain are random. Some of them have been shown to be self-triggered. They've done studies with twins where they had these genetically inherited diseases that every child was supposed to get from the mother. I can't remember the name of this particular disease. It was very rare. It's very long, but they had identical twins were born, and one of the little girls had it, and one of them didn't. So genetics is not as cut and hard and dry as it's made out to be. It's not this sort of like fated thing. And again, the hard evidence has not been produced to portray that it causes psychopathology. Now, as regards to socio and the economic environmental kind of thing, well, that's complete bunk. Okay, George Bush, Tony Blair, and David Rockefeller Henry Kissinger did not grow up in the South Bronx. So that's, they're very quick to sort of put a class system on it. That's only poor people and disadvantaged people in the ghetto, and they're the ones who grow up to be psychopaths because of their environmental upbringing. And that's the worst element of psychiatry coming out there. that it's just an assumed that the brain chemistry was changed. Yes, people can be raised in an appalling environment, such as a war, such as extreme poverty. They can be sexually abused, and they can grow up with psychopathic traits, but they're not psychopaths. What they're doing is they're lashing out at the world. They weren't born psychopaths. They were made into, very dysfunctional people. But they can be cured. They can, 9 times out of 10, just getting them out of that environment, you can cure them. So there's a deliberate blurring of the issue on so many levels, because I really do feel that they don't want to really touch psychopathy. They don't want to deal with it in a hard way. Someone like Robert Hare, who's been, at the University of British Columbia, has been working on it for 30 years, and he still has difficulty trying to find funding for it. So it's like for research and things like that. And that's because the people who are controlling the society don't want this information getting out, because we'll start putting 1 and 2 together, 1 and 1 together, and getting 2 and pointing at the top of the pyramid. There's a lot of that going on, and there's a lot of disinfo put out there about, it's genetic and it's this. But when you really look at it, it's back to what I said earlier on. It just seems to appear out of nowhere as like a predatory savant. So I don't really have much faith in the genetic stuff, and I certainly don't have. But if good evidence came along, I would accept it. But right now, I haven't seen it. And as regards to the socio upbringing thing, it doesn't hold water, because psychopaths come from every single class, from the super rich to the super poor, and often they grow up in empathic families.
Yeah, I would agree with the last statement there. Thank you. And another question I have is a moral conundrum I'd like to explore. Say you're working with a psychopathic colleague or supervisor who's threatening your ability to carry on with your work, and you have no economic choices available immediately to you. You have a family to support, etc., and you can't simply walk away, which might be your first choice, not wanting to engage. You cannot wait because this psychopath is destroying your career or about to even get you terminated. What would you recommend as a course of positive action to protect oneself and one's career?
Yeah, well, this is something you can do something about. But the psychopath generally has been put in a position where they make you feel like you can't, but you can very much do something about this. The first thing you do is you never allow, I worked on Wall Street for years, so I have to deal with them all the time. So the first thing you do is you never allow them to get you alone and tell you anything regarding the actual business out of the sight of anyone else, because they will try to... They will tell you one thing and then another person another. So if they want a meeting down in a room, a quiet, like in a conference room, just you and him or you and her, refuse it. Say, we have to have it in our cubicle. Second thing you do is, if they tell you something, you repeat it loudly back. So if they pull you in a corner and say blah 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 blah, blah, you'll say in a loud voice, calmly, you say, "Excuse me, yeah, whatever you say, Joe, we'll do this, no problem." And you'll see the psychopath is looking around to see who else is hearing him. The next thing you can if they're driving you mad and you're under stress, do not show it in front of them, because they love it and they'll only make it worse for you. Go into the bathroom and lose your temper there or cry in there, but don't do it in front of them. Maintain calmness as much as possible. And finally, get books on psychopaths like mine and anyone others and put it on your desk upright. You don't have to wave it around. The psychopath has any inkling that you're onto them, that you know what they are, they will leave you alone. They will literally not lose interest in you and go find someone who hasn't figured them out yet.